It was not Merrick Garland's job to keep Donald Trump out of office politically.
Is this crazy?
It was our job. So we're going to do the long-awaited post on the January 6th investigation, on the complaints about...
Merrick Garland wasted a year and a half.
It was readily apparent that Garland had little desire to investigate and potentially prosecute Trump.
The biggest failure of an attorney general in American history.
Merrick Garland,
Who, spoiler alert, sucks.
not being up to the task on Donald Trump.
If Merrick Garland had done his job for once in this goddamn administration, Trump wouldn't have even run for president. You know why? He'd have already been behind bars.
We're going to arrange it in a set of smaller videos and then be able to do the whole video as a whole so that we can break them out.
I was writing about this in 2021. In January 2022 for MSNBC, I wrote an article. So come on, Garland, step it up here.
Because of the way criminal justice works in the United States, especially was working in an era of COVID, there was never going to be a time when Donald Trump was in prison before the 2024 election. That was always a magical pony. But especially after the Supreme Court weighed in March of 2024, we knew that wasn't going to happen. And we didn't sit down and do the work and get people out like we now are getting to make sure that Donald Trump didn't get back in power.
In a sense, they have left the question open for the criminal authorities and for the American people what to do about Donald Trump's allegedly criminal conduct.
The March 2024 Supreme Court opinion on the Colorado case says the only way to disqualify Donald Trump is with an insurrection prosecution, right?
They're doing this on the eve of Super Tuesday, which makes sense. And I guess gives us some sense that the Supreme Court is looking at the political calendar, not just the legal calendar.
From that point forward, the only thing that is going to disqualify Trump, is going to keep him off the ballot, is politics.
Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, told the January 6th committee that when President Trump learned of the rioters chanting "Hang Mike Pence," he said something to the effect of maybe Mr. Pence should be hung. And as for those rioters, shortly before speaking to CPAC, the former president collaborated with a group of incarcerated January 6th inmates on this.
That is where we failed, and I failed, and all of us failed.
Today is the starkest proof yet that in the zero-sum battle between MAGA and democracy, there was and is only one thing that could ever truly stop Donald Trump, and that is we the people.
It was not Merrick Garland's job to keep Donald Trump out of office politically. It was our job.
The effectiveness of the delay tactics by Donald Trump's team.
They were absolutely successful. I mean, that was, running basically, 3 for 4 here ultimately in the end. And even on that one, he was, in the New York case, he wasn't ultimately sentenced to any real time.
That's the thing. If you were one of those guys who spent 2021 and 2022 saying, if only Merrick Garland, chances are really good that you were simply too fucking lazy to do the very hard work of figuring out what the criminal investigation looked like. If you were one of the guys in 2023 and 2024 who said, if only Merrick Garland would have done his job, you were selling people a magical pony, and a very dangerous magical pony, because instead of doing the hard work like we saw in New York to get Mamdani elected, doing the hard work to get millions of people to come out for the No Kings rallies, doing the hard work that people in Chicago are doing, rather than doing that work when it would have been easier, people were sitting comfortably on their couches saying, Merrick Garland can bring us a magical pony.
Look, if it happened, I think you'd have problems in this country, the likes of which perhaps we've never seen before. I don't think the people of the United States would stand for it.
One thing that happened in this transition period from Biden to Trump, all of these people who had a platform during the election, basically from 2023 to 2024, to call out these developments, to remind people about these developments, they confessed they didn't know key details about the investigation.
What jumped out to me that we didn't really know about was the extensive litigation that the special counsel had to go through just to get this evidence.
When you have Dan Goldman saying, I didn't know how long it took to get executive privilege waivers, he is confessing, one, that he didn't know that was made public by Politico during the election, And two, that he didn't know that it was halfway started before Jack Smith was appointed. It started in June of 2022. It started literally before the first main January 6th committee hearing.
Mark, this is incredibly frustrating.
After that case died, he was like, oh, we need X, Y, and Z to get this information, for example, about Kash Patel. I'm like, well, why don't you just look at the docket? Because that's been public since April 2024.
Volume 2 of the report, just to be very clear, is going to provide a lot more information that we don't know.
Or confessing that he didn't see filings in the stolen documents case from April 2024, which revealed a lot about what Kash Patel had done to obstruct his own testimony in that other case.
I don't think that's accurate.
So we had the people who had the platform who basically were confessing that, oops, I missed key details that I could have spent during the election.
We know very little.
But the other thing about this is during this entire time, we were having these fights about what Garland did or did not do, right? So what we did is we filled lefty discussions not with here's what Trump did, here's what we know about the obstruction of the investigation going on as we speak. Here's what the Supreme, there was a lot of coverage about the Supreme Court's interventions, but here is why the Supreme Court's interventions are an attempt to interfere in this election and why we need to tie all of these together. We were instead bashing Garland. In fact, bashing Garland without knowing, for example, that the fight over executive privilege started 5 months before Jack Smith was appointed.
I think that Merrick Garland took too long.
And we're doing it again. And that is the insane thing, is rather than focusing on, for example, the fact that DHS apparently is getting rid of its own communications. The DHS will not reveal drone footage of the attacks on peaceful protesters in Chicago. That DOJ is refusing to let Todd Blanche testify about how they politicized the investigation of Kilmar Brego Garcia.
How do you address the appearance of pay for play?
Well, here's the thing. I know nothing about it.
We're not talking about those things. We're talking about, frankly, misleading claims about an investigation from a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Now, let me give you just one example.
My colleague, Carol Lennig, reports that acting out of a mix of principle and caution, Attorney General Merrick Garland actually slow-walked the federal investigations into Donald Trump and granted Trump unusual deference because he was the prior and possible future president.
Everyone is furious about a report that said Merrick Garland shut down the Jack Smith investigation during the pre-election period in 2022.
Merrick Garland imposed a 2-month freeze on investigations during the 2022 election campaign. Critics said that was an overly conservative interpretation of the DOJ policy not to take action.
By the way, the Hunter Biden case did as well. People are like, why did they do this?
Donald Trump was not on the ballot.
That's actually incredibly misleading because there were people on the ballot in 2022 who were central to January 6th. People like Carrie Lake, people like Doug Mastriano, both of them on the ballot to be governor of a swing state. But the other thing is right before this period, like literally in September of 2022, which marginally is part of that pre-election period, DOJ, before Jack Smith, dumped this huge set of legal process, serving legal process, Boris Epstein, Mike Roman, Ivanka's chief of staff, Nick Luna, Trump's body man, Dan Scavino, Bernie Kerik, Trump's campaign manager, Stephen Miller, Mark Meadows, all of these people, there was this massive dump of legal process literally right before the election period. They got Boris Epstein's phone. They got Mike Roman's phone.
You saw from the demonic speech that Biden gave in Philadelphia, exactly, this is a dying regime.
People were bitching everywhere about how much investigation was going on.
What they're trying to do, no matter who it is, Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago, there were 35 FBI raids yesterday, right? Handing out, there's another grand jury coming together on January 6th.
We also know in that period, again, the executive privilege fight is going on. The first executive privilege waived interviews were in that period. Chuck Grassley has revealed a page and a half of subpoenas that went out in that period.
I'm releasing documents with Senator Johnson about Arctic frost. Specifically, the documents show its scope expanded to include 92 Republican organizations.
Meanwhile, do you know what is happening? Do you know what delay is happening in that period? Which is that the January 6th committee, having told DOJ that it would release the January 6th committee transcripts for September, having held up the Proud Boys trial, without which you cannot move to a Trump indictment, they held on to those transcripts until December. So the delay that was happening was the January 6th committee holding on to those transcripts. But none of that matters at this point. I mean, one, the outrage is based on wildly misleading claims. Two, claims that actually don't provide context.
Because I'm being indicted for you.
Donald Trump spent all that time turning it into a grievance.
I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
We spent no time turning that into a disqualification.
A full-fledged deadly insurrection at our nation's capital, unlike anything we've ever seen, really. Capitol ransacked, police officers having their brains bashed in.
But also, like, what are we doing? Why are we still making Merrick Garland the villain and wasting our energy when Donald Trump is still right there kidnapping people in Chicago?
She ain't even do shit. She trying to go to work. She's trying to go
Have some of these raids gone too far?
No, I think they haven't gone far enough.
If you're spending your time now, after Mamdani won,
they have Cassidy Hutchinson testify in a blockbuster hearing.
After Democrats won all over the country, one in small cities, one in Mississippi, one in Aurora, Colorado.
It's pretty blockbuster stuff that she shares about what it was like the morning of January 6th and the day before, how much Trump wanted to drive up to the Capitol himself.
After we see Chicago standing up to fight fascism in the street.
Well, we learned that Garland is watching those televised hearings on that day, and he turns to a coterie of aides and says, "Did we know about her?" And one aide turns to him and says, "No, sir, we didn't."
If you are spending your time whining about Merrick Garland now because somebody is trying to milk your outrage to sell books, to focus your outrage on Merrick Garland and not on Donald Trump, you're being used.
Now, we find that her testimony ends up not being critical to the criminal case.
This focus on Merrick Garland, whether you like what he did or didn't, was always infantilizing, always making people trade their agency as citizens of a democracy away, outsourcing it to Merrick Garland, whose job it wasn't in the first place to do the political work to defeat Donald Trump. It was especially crazy after the Supreme Court weighed in, but there was never a time, ever, when Donald Trump was going to be in jail by 2024. There was never going to be a time when that was the way to disqualify him from the ballot. His conduct had to be that, and that took work that we, all of us, didn't succeed in doing.